Hey everyone, I am super excited about today's show. I have a special guest. Her name is Michele O'Neil, and Michele is a 37-year veteran in HR and employee relations and currently works as the Senior Director of Work Environment with Marriott International. Michele and I are going to talk some shop about insights and trends in employee relations and also discuss some best practices for management. This is one you won't want to miss.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everybody, welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast. As you know, my name is Natalie Ivey and I am your podcast host, and I'm super excited to have my guest with me here today. I have Michele O'Neil, who is the Senior Director of Work Environment with Marriott International. The topic for today's podcast is navigating employee relations and insights and trends with a senior HR leader in hospitality. So before we dig into some of that meatier kind of stuff, I'd like to turn it over to Michele and have her share a little bit about her career background and how you came to be where you are in your career today. Can you share that with our listening audience, Michele?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I started out with Marriott about 37 years ago as someone who didn't really know where I wanted to go in my career. I started out in operations, and so I did that for about 5 years in the front office. And then I transitioned into training and recruiting, kind of a hybrid position, and then into an HR generalist at a resort down in Florida. I've had a great career. I became just a generalist as a director at several different locations throughout the U.S., and then decided to transition into associate relations. Someone thought I would be good at it, and so I said, yeah, I'll do it, of course. And so I've kind of found my niche, and I've done associate relations for, a lot of years. I did international for all of our international properties several years ago, and then I transitioned to the Caribbean and Latin America, where I am now. So I've been here since 2013. I've done some different positions. I was an area director of HR for the team there for the Caribbean, and then became where I am now, Senior Director of Associate Relations or Work Environment.
Yeah, fantastic. And so it was really fun to work with your team recently. Really enjoyed that. We did an investigations program, and so that was really fun. Especially when you work with an international team. One thing that I find really interesting when I work with global organizations is that employee relations is crossing all kinds of continents. It isn't this all U.S.-based stuff. You still are going to have complaints of favoritism. You're still going to have complaints of bullying or harassment or things like that. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Brazil, whether you're in Canada, you're in Colombia, or you're in England. With the topic of our podcast today, which is on just really navigating some of the employee relations issues and trends. So what are some of the things that you as a senior leader are seeing show up in the workplace that you're finding that your team is having to navigate? And just in general in, the employee relations space?
I see a lot more harassment, sexual harassment cases, where you'd see one every now and then, and we get them sometimes weekly, and I think that people are a lot more sensitized to it because they've heard about the Me Too movement and those kind of things. And it doesn't matter what country you're in, they've still heard about it. And they bring things forward where in the past, I think they would let things slide a little bit more than they do now. So definitely the harassment, and not just sexual harassment in general, bullying, those things that, again, no one would have called it out probably 10 years ago, but they do now. Mental health, it's a big thing.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about that. I'm seeing that show up too.
Yeah, I mean, people that are depressed or they're, going through some challenges with, taking care of elderly parents or their new mothers or their new dads and, just they're struggling with their mental health and balancing it all and the stress and of balancing work life and family and work. It gets to be really overwhelming for people. And so it kind of carries over into the workplace. And so we're having to be more, not just my team, but managers in general, I think, are having to be more savvy about recognizing those signs of depression and anxiety in people and helping to address those. And I think, I'd have to say that Marriott does a great job in supporting people when they're faced with those challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I know you have a really strong organizational culture. And That's one of the things I want to share with my listeners. If you haven't listened to my podcast episode, Seal of Honor, where I had Tom Desjardins on, who's a retired Navy SEAL, Tom and I were talking a lot about organizational culture, but also what it means to create a culture of accountability as well. One of the things that I'm seeing show up a little bit with kind of the mental health issue is certainly some of the things that you've talked about, Michele, yes. And even if with our own client base, with my company, RPC Human Resources, we're seeing those same things, work-life balance, and people really just trying to juggle it all. And a lot of it is, these mobile devices, that pesky things that just keep pinging at us and drawing our attention in a million different places. That definitely adds to the stress because there's just a competition for your attention, and there are deliverables that you have to get off your desk and timelines. And also with technology, it's somewhat sped up, if you will, timelines and creating the expectation of getting back to your boss on certain things. So there's a lot of that pressure. And if you have leaders that are not really sensitive to that, that can indeed create a lot of anxiety. On the other hand, what I'm also seeing is employees that are using the performance discussion as a little bit of a crutch in coming forward and saying, well, my supervisor is affecting my mental health because simply the supervisor is having a conversation about being at work on time or having a conversation that's really more of an accountability discussion. So are you seeing any of that kind of show up?
Yeah, we do see that. And people sometimes they know that mental health is a hot button for us and something we're looking for, and they will use that as an escape. Well, I can't get to work on time because I'm depressed or I'm anxious or, there's this or that going on. So yeah, definitely. You do see it in the workplace more and more. And I was in a conference not too long ago. I think it was last year at SHRM, and they were talking about how long people wait though, just to get diagnosed with mental health issues.
Sure.
So, I think some of it's probably true. I think maybe some of it is people that just don't know that they're suffering from something that's, depression or anxiety. But more and more you're seeing people that use that as a crutch.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because there are individuals with legitimate disabilities.
Absolutely.
But, and I'm an investigator, that. There are some of those individuals that are somewhat opportunists, and they know how to kind of play this game a little bit in using those buzzwords, to sort of get the employee relations or HR department's attention. But, sometimes what that does is that really creates a bit of animosity with the managers, and that the managers are, and particularly, managers that may really be trained and they're doing a good job and they are simply just having a performance discussion. But now instead of the employee really accepting the feedback and being accountable, they create sort of this nightmare for the manager and have somewhat even weaponized the investigative process. And that's unfortunate. I talked with a leader very recently, a regional manager actually, with a company. And he just said, look, I've got an employee in sales who is just on the bottom. His ranking with the team, he just isn't performing. And the supervisor just had to sit down and have a conversation with him. But then it turned into a harassment complaint. It has nothing to do with harassment whatsoever. The sales performance statistics are not going to lie. You're either meeting your numbers or you're not. And then when someone is talking with you about being accountable for that, it suddenly then turns into you're harassing me or you're treating me differently and you're creating this sort of mental health thing. Okay, so that's kind of a whole other level, all right? We have some individuals that are requesting reasonable accommodations that are in some cases just not reasonable. I had a case not long ago with, and this was in hospitality, but more of a food service environment. So didn't have the hotel or resort element to it. But it was a situation with an employee who just refused to work with two of the managers on the team. She just claimed that those two particular supervisors caused her mental health issues. She didn't really have anything substantive to report, but the issue was apparently one manager talked with her about not having handled proper closing procedures in the cafe the previous night, and just simply wanted to remind her of that. But immediately, the moment that there was any sort of criticism, she just ran to HR, and it's like, you're bullying me, you're harassing me, or you're treating me differently. You don't do this with anybody else. Okay, and that is not the case. The managers are really consistent. If closing procedures aren't followed, they hold people accountable. But she kind of turned it into that. And that it was the other manager that this other manager just simply corrected her with an order that was about to go out wrong. They had a to-go order, and there were some mistakes in it. And because the manager corrected her, instead of oh, wow, my bad. I'm sorry, I should have done it. It isn't. It's just not accepting of, again, the accountability and turning it into a thing.
Which really does happen.
In your environment and working and leading teams, and you've been doing this a very long time, so you're a veteran like me as well. What are some of the best practices and things that you can share with our audience? Maybe some best practices for supervisors and kind of managing employee relations day to day. And then you can share maybe some best practices from a team perspective in an employee relations team and just navigating kind of this issue.
I think for supervisors, it's consistency. Treating the team the same, holding people accountable in the same way. I mean, not everything is cookie cutter. And so there's always a little deviance every now and then, but, being consistent. I think that normally gets us in trouble when people aren't consistent and they're not really, that brings up that favoritism and that treating people, you're treating him or her different than you're treating me. So, kind of trying to shy away from that. So, I think that's a big one. And you're not their friend. You're their boss, you're their supervisor. So don't be going out and, socializing and hanging out. That's another big one. And that's a hard lesson to learn, I think, especially at that supervisor stage, because you want to be their friend. And a lot of times they've been promoted from a peer level and now they're supervising somebody. So they have a different relationship with them. So they have to kind of learn and grow and really, lead people, and learn how to do that and treat people the way you would want to be treated. So I think that's extremely important. From a team perspective, again, I think we juggle a lot, and it's really influencing people who you have no direct authority over. If there's one skill I would say, no matter where you are in HR, is the power to influence people and to make them understand where you're coming from, and get them where you want them to go. Again, a lot of times I deal with people that I don't hold their LPAs or what we call the review process. So, I'm probably not even going to be asked about how they're performing their job, but I need to somehow motivate senior leaders to understand where I'm coming from and what the severity is if we don't do what I'm suggesting. Lots of times it's viewed as a suggestion, but you got to do what you got to do. We have to take those necessary steps, as you know. And sometimes it's not what they want to hear. It's their best and brightest. And they want to keep that person. And unfortunately, that person has made a mistake that's, ultimately going to cost them their job probably. And they have to understand how that all works. So, yeah, I mean, influencing, I think, is probably one of the biggest things without that direct authority.
I completely agree. That's one of the things I always talk about with even more junior professionals that come into employee relations. Don't wait until you have a whopper of a harassment case to get to know your department heads. You should have been working on that relationship building ahead of time, help them to understand what your role is, your responsibilities, and also establishing clear boundaries, especially when we do have to investigate things. I'm often, asked by supervisors, they'll say, well, why is it that you don't want us to know anything about what's going on with the investigation? This is my department, whether it's a food and beverage director in one of your F&B outlets or it's somebody like a GM of a property. You're better off not knowing. You need to be out of it and let a neutral, disinterested third party look into it. Let's say it is an allegation of something as serious as like sexual harassment or national origin discrimination. The individuals who will be interviewed in that are witnesses, you don't want the knowledge of them participating in the investigation to cloud your judgment down the road. Maybe it is that an employee that you really did think very highly of, that was one of your direct reports, did make a mistake and it did cost them their job. Well, if the statements that maybe two of the coworkers gave in the investigation, those statements were pretty powerful that really led to the departure of that employee. Later on, if you know about that, that can cloud your judgment when it comes time for assessing promotional opportunities and other things. So that's why it's always better for the supervisors to recognize you need a neutral, disinterested group that's going to look into this stuff.
Right. Yeah. I 100% agree. I think being neutral is so important, and not having those personal relationships with people where, that bias does creep in, and you can't, and we're all human. So, it's going to happen. So, my team is split up. I have 3 people that work with me, great professionals. They're all learning. They're all new to associate relations. They just did their training with you, which was very important. for them, and they had a great experience with that. But I pick and choose cases based on, if somebody has worked in a certain area, and even if they've done a lot of cases in Mexico, I want to change it up a little bit, because I don't want anybody to say, well, this person, they've gotten to know these managers and they're not as thorough, or they're not as, disciplined in how they look into things. So it kind of keeps it fresh for the team, but also keeps that from creeping in. So, and I think it's a good experience for all of them. I mean, we support 36 countries.
Yeah.
So, you can't be an expert in all of them, but if you spend all your time focusing on just one country, then you kind of lag behind on the others. So,
yeah, that makes perfect sense. And something just came to mind before we wrap up for the episode here is, on the one hand, we want employee relations, or if you call them associate relations professionals, to have built relationships with the different managers that they're going to be interacting with. So let's say a department head, maybe food and beverage in a property, or executive housekeeper in another. Building those relationships from the standpoint of they understand the role, the responsibility, the authority of what associate relations actually does, or employee relations. But on the other hand, you have to have some professional boundaries regarding those relationships as well. Like you said, going out and socializing, let's say after work. Now, I know for some of your team, they're working remotely, and they're not necessarily, hopping a plane to Mexico City to go a couple of martinis after work. It's not necessarily happening. But for a lot of our listening audience, people who work in human resources or employee relations, you do get to be, or if you're an HR business partner, and this is where it tends to be a little too cozy. And what I find happens sometimes is that word you brought up a little while ago, Michele, which is bias. And what can happen is when you are working day in and day out very closely with the managers, they may pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, by the way, employee Tony so-and-so is going to complain. Well, let me tell you what this is all about. And they kind of get ahead of it. And what happens is that over time, the HR business partner or even the ER rep, you're really, really kind of leaning toward the side just of management. And that's a kind of precarious place to be. So while on the one hand, you need to have some strong relationships where they know what your role is and they understand the boundaries when a case is happening, you also need to have some kind of personal boundaries with those relationships too.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not trying to say don't be social with people, because, we all need to build those work relationships, but knowing where to draw that line, keeping it professional. If you're getting sloppy at the bar, you're not being professional. And especially as an associate relations investigator or even an HR professional, I just think that's really not how you want to behave and what you want to do. So, you can go out and have a drink and excuse yourself and say, it was great seeing everybody, have a great day. But, you don't have to take it to the 1 a.m. kind of scenario.
So, yeah, I completely agree. Yes, it's kind of difficult when you're supposed to be setting the example, but yet, you had to sort of be carried out after one too many Jell-O shooters.
Yeah.
Not necessarily setting the right example.
No, not at all.
Super. So any other trends that you can share with us that you're seeing show up in hospitality? Anything unique? Obviously, you've been in this particular industry for a very long time.
I think that after the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people that, have got a lot more savvy around what their employment rights are. And so, again, I think that leads to more case volume or investigation volume, because people are coming forward about not just harassment, sexual harassment, mental health. They're coming forward about other issues that they see, and they're not just saying, well, I have to take it or I have to do this. Everybody's got choices, and there's a lot of opportunities, especially in the hospitality field. Now, I'm fortunate we're a great company to work for, and people want to work for us. But still, we have to make sure we're providing a great work environment, which I think we do. But people do bring things up more often than they used to, and which I think is good. Again, I always tell my managers, and I tell people that I'm training and trying to develop, treat people with respect and dignity. It goes a long way.
An attorney that I've worked with for a very long time, one of the things he always says is better to handle problems at the in-house rather than at the courthouse,
Right. And things rarely, if you don't tackle it when it first is brought up, if you kind of try to sweep it under the rug, it's just going to come up and it's going to be bigger and it's going to be worse. So tackling things head on, while it may be uncomfortable or it make you not feel good, that's the only way to go about it, because it just gets bigger and bigger. And then you're dealing with something where we've got to step in and really come in and help you. So.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, I definitely see that pretty much almost every day. and, and the sphere in which I work, where things do fester. Well, Michele, it has really been a pleasure having you with me and for my listeners. So some key takeaways: make sure that you are training your supervisors. They've got to have some consistency in the way that they're interacting with their employees, consistency in the way they're holding people accountable, but they also have to have a sensitivity around even the mental health issues today, and they need to understand the ADA. Your managers have really got to understand that. So that's part of also some regulatory compliance training where they understand some do's and don'ts. And they need to make sure also that they properly escalate cases that they're unsure about what to do to their employee relations or associate relations groups, or for some of you, HR. All right. Until next time on the HR Investigations podcast, I want to say thank you and hope this has been a good episode. And I will see you next time, gang. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with the case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.